When Emily arrived at the grand wedding hall, she immediately felt out of place. The chandeliers sparkled like diamonds. Guests laughed in polished clothes, and every table seemed filled with smiling couples. She had been invited out of courtesy, a distant cousin's gesture, but her name card sat alone at a table in the corner. She adjusted her modest light blue dress and tried to smile, but every glance she caught from others reminded her she was there without a partner. Her ex-husband had left years ago, and since then she'd learned to hide loneliness behind a polite nod. Her little boy was with a neighbor tonight, and for the first time in months she found herself surrounded by laughter that wasn't hers. The music swelled, the dance floor shimmered, and she quietly folded her napkin, pretending to check her phone so no one would see the emptiness in her eyes. As the ceremony began, Emily tried to focus on the vows, but her mind wandered. The way the bride smiled, the way the groom held her hand, it felt like a scene from a world she no longer belonged to. She sighed softly and reached for her glass of water. That's when she noticed a tall man entering the hall, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, confidence in every step. His presence shifted the energy of the room. Whispers followed him like shadows. Emily didn't recognize him at first, but then she realized it was Alexander Reed, the CEO of Reed Enterprises, one of the sponsors of the event. She had only seen him once in a newspaper article about philanthropy. He looked powerful, yet detached, scanning the room with quiet calculation before his eyes landed directly on her. For a moment she thought she imagined it, but he began walking straight toward her table. Emily's heart pounded. Why would a man like him approach someone like her? She instinctively checked behind her, thinking he might be heading for someone else, but no. He stopped right in front of her. "Excuse me," he said with a low, calm voice. "Is this seat taken?" Before she could answer, he smiled faintly and sat down beside her. His cologne was subtle, the kind that lingered in the air just long enough to be noticed. Emily blinked, unsure how to react. I think you might have the wrong table," she whispered nervously. Alexander leaned in slightly, his blue eyes locking on hers. "I know," he said softly, "but if anyone asks, pretend I'm your husband tonight." The words hit her like thunder. She froze, staring at him, trying to understand if he was joking, but his expression was calm and serious. Her first instinct was to laugh, to deflect the absurdity of the situation, but something in his tone stopped her. "Why would I do that?" she finally asked, voice trembling slightly. Alexander leaned back, glancing around the hall. "Let's just say it's complicated," he murmured. "There's someone here I'd rather not talk to tonight, and you look like the only person who won't ask questions." Emily frowned, still confused. "You could have picked anyone else," she said. "Why me?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because you're the only one not pretending to be happy." His words struck something deep inside her. She wanted to deny it, but his quiet observation felt too true. She exhaled and nodded slowly. "Fine," she said, "but I expect a good story if someone asks how we met." Alexander's lips curved into a rare, genuine smile. As the evening went on, the room seemed to shift around them. People who had barely noticed Emily before now glanced curiously at the elegant man sitting beside her. Whispers started, and soon a distant relative came over, all smiles. "Emily, you didn't tell us you were married," she said, eyes darting between the two. Emily hesitated, but Alexander took her hand effortlessly, intertwining his fingers with hers. "We like to keep things private," he said smoothly, his tone so natural it could have fooled anyone. Emily felt her cheeks warm, but surprisingly, she didn't pull away. For the first time that night, she didn't feel invisible. The warmth of his hand, the confidence in his voice, it all felt unreal, like stepping into a dream she didn't know she needed. They shared small talk that soon turned into laughter. Alexander asked about her son, about her work as a freelance designer, and listened without checking his phone once. It felt strange being truly seen. When the music slowed, couples moved to the dance floor, and to her surprise, Alexander stood and offered his hand. "May I?" he asked. Emily hesitated. "It's been a long time," she murmured, but he simply replied, "Then let's fix that." Under the golden glow of the chandeliers, they danced slowly, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. The world outside their little circle faded away. For a moment, it wasn't a pretense. It felt real, honest, almost healing. His presence didn't demand anything. It simply existed, steady and warm. As the music ended, they returned to the table, both a little quieter now. Emily could feel something changing in her. The way she saw herself, the way she carried her loneliness. Alexander seemed to notice. "You know," he said gently, "you don't have to apologize for being alone." She looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. "It's not easy," she admitted. "People look at you like you failed." He shook his head. "People only see what they want to see, but strength doesn't always shout." His words settled deep inside her, like a truth she'd forgotten. She smiled faintly. "And what about you?" she asked. He looked away for a moment. "Let's just say I've built everything except peace." When the evening began to wind down, a woman approached their table, tall, elegant, clearly someone from Alexander's world. "Alexander," she said sharply, ignoring Emily, "I didn't expect to see you here." He smiled politely but coldly. "Change of plans," he replied. The woman's gaze flicked to Emily's hand in his, and something in her expression shifted. "I see," she said, forcing a smile. "Well, enjoy your evening." When she left, Emily turned to him. "That's who you were hiding from?" He nodded slightly. "An ex-fiancée. Let's just say she doesn't like losing." Emily couldn't help but laugh softly. "So I saved you tonight?" He looked at her, eyes softening. "More than you know." The night finally ended and the crowd began to thin. Outside, the air was cool, scented with rain and roses from the garden. Alexander walked her to her car, the soft hum of music still echoing from inside. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For playing along," Emily smiled. "You're welcome, Mr. Reed." He paused, then added, "It's Alexander, and maybe next time I won't need an excuse to sit beside you." The words lingered between them, tender and unexpected. For a moment they simply looked at each other, two people from different worlds connected by something neither could name. When Emily drove home, her heart was lighter than it had been in years. Her reflection in the rearview mirror looked different, stronger, alive. She didn't know if she'd ever see Alexander again, but that wasn't the point. For one evening, someone had reminded her that she wasn't invisible, that her story wasn't over. The next morning, when she woke to a text that said, "I meant what I said last night," she smiled, her heart fluttering with cautious hope. Maybe life had just begun to show her that even the loneliest moments could lead to something extraordinary. And as sunlight poured through the window, Emily finally let herself believe that sometimes pretending could open the door to something real. The following week, Emily returned to her quiet apartment, her life slipping back into its usual rhythm of school runs, freelance projects, and late-night coffee. Yet something had shifted in her. Her heart no longer carried the same heaviness. One evening, as she reviewed client designs, a message popped up on her phone. "Would you join me for coffee tomorrow?" No pretending this time. It was from Alexander. She hesitated for a moment, smiling softly as she reread the line. The words felt both gentle and daring. The next day, she dressed in a simple cream blouse and navy skirt, her hair tied neatly, nervous energy coursing through her. When she arrived at the cafe, Alexander was already there, dressed casually in a white shirt with his sleeves rolled up, his demeanor more approachable than before. He stood when he saw her, the faintest smile touching his lips, and said, "I was hoping you'd say yes." The awkwardness melted into easy conversation. Laughter replaced hesitation. For the first time in years, Emily felt like she belonged somewhere, not as someone's helper, not as a guest, but as herself. When she left, he offered to walk her home, and as they strolled under the warm glow of the city lights, their hands brushed gently, not by pretense this time, but by quiet choice. Weeks passed, and their bond grew stronger with every shared laugh and late-night talk. Alexander found himself admiring Emily's resilience, how she balanced motherhood and work without ever asking for pity. He would occasionally visit her home, bringing small surprises for her son, model cars, puzzles, and once even a box of freshly baked cookies that quickly disappeared between them. One afternoon, while Emily was fixing a loose button on his shirt, He looked at her with a rare softness in his eyes. "You've changed how I see things," he said quietly. She looked up, unsure how to respond, her fingers pausing mid-thread. He continued, "You reminded me that strength doesn't always wear a suit." Emily felt her heart tighten, her usual defenses trembling under the sincerity in his voice. Outside, the golden afternoon sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a warm hue over the room. It felt peaceful, almost unreal. But as soon as the moment began to deepen, her phone buzzed, her ex-husband's name flashing across the screen. Her breath caught. Reality intruded like a shadow across the light, and Alexander noticed her hesitation. "You don't have to answer," he said gently, his tone calm but filled with quiet understanding. Emily smiled faintly and whispered, "Maybe not today." That night, Emily couldn't sleep. The message from her ex-husband lingered in her mind, short, sharp, and full of regret. He wanted to see their son, to talk things over, as if the past could be folded neatly and forgotten. She stared at her phone, the faint glow of the screen reflecting in her tired eyes. Across town, Alexander sat in his study, the memory of her hesitant smile haunting him. He'd spent years building walls of control and logic around his emotions, but somehow, Emily and her quiet strength had slipped through every defense. The next morning, Emily dropped her son off at school, her heart heavier than usual. When she arrived at work, she found a note on her desk from Alexander. "Lunch at the Garden Cafe. Fresh air might help." She hesitated but smiled despite herself. At the cafe, sunlight filtered through hanging vines, dappling the table in warm, playful patterns. He was already there, waiting with that calm presence she'd come to rely on. As they talked, Emily confessed her fears, not about her ex, but about letting anyone close again. Alexander listened silently, his gaze steady, no judgment, only patience. Then he said quietly, "Sometimes the hardest part of moving forward is believing we deserve to." His words lingered between them like a promise she wasn't yet ready to accept, but deeply needed to hear. Days turned into weeks, and life seemed to fall into a gentle rhythm neither of them had expected. Emily began smiling more easily, her laughter returning like sunlight after a long storm. Alexander noticed how she carried herself differently now, still cautious but with a spark of confidence that hadn't been there before. He found excuses to stop by her office, sometimes under the pretense of discussing work, other times just to see her reaction when he brought her favorite coffee. One afternoon, after a long meeting, Emily invited him to walk with her by the riverside near her apartment. The city lights shimmered on the water, reflecting in her brown eyes as they strolled side by side. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think happiness was something that only happened to other people." Alexander looked at her, his expression gentle. "And now?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Now I think it might just be about finding the right company." He stopped walking, his gaze lingering on her face. "Then maybe you've already found it," he replied, voice low but steady. The air between them was warm, filled with unspoken feelings and quiet understanding. Emily looked away, blushing slightly, but she didn't move. For the first time in years, she felt safe, not because someone protected her, but because someone truly saw her. The next weekend came with an unexpected invitation, a wedding of one of Alexander's close friends. He asked Emily if she'd accompany him, not as his assistant, but as his guest. She hesitated at first, unsure of how it might look or feel, but his sincerity made it impossible to refuse. That evening, under the glow of chandeliers and soft music, Emily arrived in a pale blue dress that shimmered delicately under the lights. Alexander, in his classic black suit, couldn't take his eyes off her. When she reached his side, he leaned slightly closer and whispered with a teasing smile, "Pretend I'm your husband tonight, just so I don't have to explain why I can't stop staring." Emily's heart skipped, her cheeks flushing, but she laughed softly, playing along. Throughout the evening, they shared quiet jokes, exchanged glances across the table, and danced once. A slow, easy rhythm that felt more like connection than formality. Guests smiled at them, assuming they were a real couple, and for a fleeting moment, Emily wished it were true. As the night drew to a close, they stood outside beneath the twinkling lights strung across the courtyard. The world seemed to slow down, the sound of laughter fading into the background. Alexander turned to her and said softly, "You've changed everything I thought I knew about love." Emily looked up, eyes glistening, realizing that sometimes the most unexpected encounters lead to the most extraordinary beginnings. After that unforgettable night, Emily found herself replaying every moment. The warmth of his voice, the calm strength in his eyes, the way he made her feel seen for the first time in years. But the next morning, she tried to return to normal life, burying those feelings under work and routine. Alexander, however, couldn't pretend. He sent her a brief message, "Dinner tonight?" No pretending this time. Her heart raced as she read it, fingers hesitating over the screen. That evening, she arrived at a quiet rooftop restaurant overlooking the city skyline. The sunset painted everything in soft gold and rose tones, reflecting off the glass buildings around them. Alexander was waiting, hands in his pockets, his usual composed demeanor slightly cracked by anticipation. As she approached, he smiled, not the confident CEO smile she knew, but something genuine, almost vulnerable. Over dinner, they talked not about business, but about life, dreams, and second chances. Emily confessed how hard it had been to trust again, how being both mother and survivor had left her afraid of hope. Alexander listened, his gaze steady, and finally said, "You don't have to do everything alone anymore." For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then softly, she reached across the table and took his hand. The city lights began to twinkle below them, as if silently blessing a new beginning that neither of them had expected, but both deeply needed. In the days that followed, their connection deepened quietly, without grand gestures or promises, just small moments that built something real. Alexander began joining Emily and her son for simple dinners, board games, and walks in the park. To her surprise, he fit naturally into their little world. Her son, shy at first, quickly grew fond of him, laughing easily at his stories and clinging to his hand when they crossed the street. Emily would watch them together, a soft ache in her heart, the kind of ache that comes from realizing how much you've missed something you never thought you'd have again. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching a movie, her son fell asleep between them. The room was dimly lit, quiet except for the sound of soft breathing. Alexander glanced at her, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to answer this now," he said, "but I want to be here, for both of you." Emily blinked back, unexpected tears, her throat tightening. She looked at him, unable to find the right words, but her silence said enough. Outside, rain began to fall gently against the window, a peaceful rhythm that wrapped around them. For the first time in a long while, Emily didn't feel alone. She felt chosen.